How to be an artist. Step 35. Writing for yourself. With guest, Doug Wagner. All right, Doug, welcome to How to Be an Artist. It's great to have you here today.
Oh, dude, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on the show. I love it. So
awesome, cool. Well, I've kind of had the pleasure of getting to know you just through the local circle of comic book people here in Utah. And so fortunately, for whatever reason, you decided to move out to Park City however many years ago. Where's it that you're originally from?
originally I'm from Florida, but I was an
Okay.
Army brat. So I kind of moved around quite a bit as a kid.
Okay.
And we moved out here. It's been 11 years now from Atlanta.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yes. I mean, at least with like within your writing, there definitely seems to be like a connection with the South. And so I definitely, get that
Oh
vibe
yeah,
with
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's everything, especially like with 12 gauge for like the ride and that kind of stuff. Like everybody involved in those books was from the South. And
Okay.
so we kind of like wanted to embrace that. Like we don't see enough of the Southern Gothic kind of, tales being told. Usually, it's like it seems like it's always either California or Northeast. We kind of
Sure.
wanted to dive into that, like, a little bit of that sweaty, dirty, like Cajun food feel of what the South can offer on stories.
Yeah, that was one thing I kind of, as I was, poking a little more closely into your work. I don't think I really knew very much about 12 gauge. So that actually could be like a fun place to start. I mean, maybe you can tell me a little bit about your career leading up to some of your latest stuff, but I'd be interested in kind of your relationship with 12 gauge, how that all kind of formed. And, um,
Yeah, I mean that's a very interesting story to me anyway. I mean, I decided I wanted to be a comic book writer when I was 17.
okay.
As you can imagine, much to the disappointment of my family.
Yep.
And and but it took a while. I mean, I got one shot with Malibu Comics, and started actually building something there. But Marvel came in, bought them, and shut them
Mm,
down just as I
mm,
was kind of getting my career going. And then it took another couple of years for me to kind of recover from that. And tons and tons of rejection. That's back before the internet and
hmm.
really even like trying to get jobs at cons for writers.
What
And
were you
so
work? Just out of curiosity, what were you working on at Malibu while you were there?
I did Ultra Force,
Okay.
and actually Cully Hamner and I, who had been friends since high school, we pitched them a create your own book.
Oh, okay.
And we were going to do a whole, like, it was going to be a mini series. They were talking toy line. I mean, they thought it was going to be a big deal.
Okay.
And just before we got the full go on that, like I said, Marvel came in and like, yeah, we just kind of bought Malibu for the coloring system, so we're shutting everything else
Oh,
down.
geez. Jerks.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's they didn't know, it's
Yeah.
like, but I mean, at that point, I was probably about 25, and it was a
Okay.
hard hit. Like
Yeah.
it was a gut punch for me. So it took me a little while to kind of get past that, and then started pitching stuff again, to everybody and anybody, and got tons of rejection letters as you should. And then probably about what was it, about 2004, Kevin Gardner, who's the president of 12 Gauge, he and I had been friends for a while. And we'd always done the same thing, everybody does, right? We're armchair publishers, right? We're like, oh, well, if I was in charge of the X-Men or if I was in charge of Batman, this is what I would do. And finally we just got to the point where we're like, hey, what if we just did it? What if we just stopped talking about it and stopped waiting for somebody to give us permission and just started doing our own books? And
Yeah.
honestly, that's where, we were like, let's do it. And luckily, over those years, we had built friends like Brian Stelfreeze and Cully, obviously, and like Jason Pearson and Georges Genty and Dexter Vines all agreed to do those first books along with Adam Hughes doing the covers.
Hmm.
We said, hey, let's just jump in and see what happens. And honestly, that was just a bug. At that point, it was like, I don't know why it took us so long to like realize you don't need anybody's permission,
Hmm.
but we just started doing it. And after that, like, I was like, oh, I don't need anybody's permission to make comics. I'm just going to make comics. And honestly, that's kind of like how my whole career has been since then.
Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty cool. I think that's kind of a tough hurdle for a lot of people to get over. Because obviously it's like there's all sorts of headaches that comes along with saying like, oh, I'm just going to make the comics that I want to make. Right. You know?
Oh yeah. Tons, not only, and you're right. Like I talk to a lot of people and you'll see a lot of people that are just, they only want to write comics in search of validation from Marvel and DC.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I'm like, guys, that's almost like, that's a really hard egg to crack.
Hmm.
And if that's your entire pursuit, like he could be missing out on a lot of other opportunities. And yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I went through the same thing when I was young. For me, it was like, hey, I'm not a serious professional unless I work for Marvel or DC.
Hmm.
And luckily I've had some work with DC, but I've had much more success doing creator-owned books than doing anything for DC. So,
Yeah.
obviously there's a lot of factors involved in that. Other than I'm not downplaying DC at all.
Sure.
My stuff didn't work as well at DC as it's working as creator-owned.
Yeah, there's also kind of a little bit of a fantasy people have, like, oh, once I get in at Marvel and DC, it's like the world's your oyster, and in a lot of ways, it's your options are narrowed with some of those, and obviously there could be some really great options and some awesome opportunities, but like still, there's kind of like some narrower choices sometimes
Oh
as
yeah, I
opposed
mean,
to.
I think everybody thinks you walk into those things and you get to do whatever you want to do. And it's
Hmm.
like, oh no, like you might have to rewrite. At one point I rewrote a script for a single issue 16 times.
Wow.
And so, people are like, oh, you get in there and you walk in there and you get to write whatever you want. And you're like, oh no, like, you might have
Yeah.
to write this story several times. And during the process of you writing it, oh, by the way, they gave Brandon, Bane. And I know this was supposed to be Bane was supposed to be your villain in this story, but it can't be anymore. So rewrite it with somebody else. So like, yeah, there's just all kinds of like crazy stuff that happens when you're doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I can imagine for artists, it's like, okay, we've got these style guides you got to follow. So and so has to look this way, yada yada yada, right? So,
Oh yeah.
so yeah, tell me a little bit more then about. I'm interested in because yeah, looking back on it, you've been working doing stuff with 12 gauge for years and years now, right? And I just noticed, I just looked at like, okay, plastic was 12 gauge, right? But you've been doing stuff with them like forever, so
Oh
that
yeah.
was not how what was the process then when you decided you wanted to do plastic, like pitching it to 12 gauge? What was that like
Oh, that
then?
was yeah. That's So Daniel and I had worked on a couple of things previously together, and we
Okay.
just decided, Daniel Hillyard, the artist, and we decided like we wanted to continue to work together. So I put together a couple of pitches for him and said, hey, here's some stuff I think you and I would work well on.
Hmm.
Um, and he came back and said he wanted to work on plastic, and I was kind of shocked because Daniel's like the sweetest human being I know. And so the fact that he wanted to do like this crazy serial killer in love with a blow up doll kind of thing was like, oh, you really want to do this? And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'll even do it for free. I don't care how we have to make this happen. I just want to make it happen. Um, so we started working on it. We probably got about into the first issue, well into the first issue. And I said, well, let's talk to Kevin and see what he thinks. And so we got Kevin on a Zoom call, and kind of started talking to him about it. But yeah, I mean, honestly, when we first pitched it to Kevin, he wasn't interested. He was
Hmm.
like, "I want nothing to do with this book."
Wow.
He was like, this isn't the kind of stuff we normally do. We normally do like kind of like an '80s action Southern
Hmm.
kind of feel to things." He was like, "This might be a little too risque for me,"
Hmm.
and he's
Interesting.
like, "Yeah." And so
You
he
mean
was.
in kind of more of the gore direction, or like in kind of the fetish direction
I
was
think it
too
was everything.
everything?
I mean,
Okay.
yeah, I think it was everything for him. He's like, yeah, I'm not interested in a serial killer book. I'm definitely not interested in anything that's got like sexual overtones, thrown throughout.
Okay.
And honestly, like he came to us and he was like, so what else would you guys prefer to work on?
Hmm.
And Daniel was the one that spoke up. Daniel goes, no, you don't understand. Like this is what Doug and I are doing next. And we love you and you've helped us along the way, but like we're offering you a chance to come with us. It's
Yeah.
we're going to do this regardless. And
Interesting.
and so like Kevin thought about it for a little bit, like for a week or two, and then he came back and he was like, you know what, yeah, I'm in. If you guys believe in this book enough that you're willing to do it, no matter what,
Yeah.
I got your back.
Wow.
And so that's kind of like where it developed from there with 12 gauge. And
Wow. Okay. Well, so yeah, I was kind of interested. You kind of answered this a little bit, but I was kind of wondering like why this story in particular. But it sounds like it was kind of within a portfolio of several things you were interested in doing at that time, and
oh
it was
yeah, I
really
mean, as every creative, right? Like I mean, I have more ideas than I probably will have
yeah.
time. And this was one that just kind of had always been there. Like the story continually developed in my head, and it's one of those stories that wouldn't leave you alone. And
Yeah.
so when Daniel picked it, I was like, perfect. I really want to do this one. And Daniel was so adamant that he wanted to do it that, I was like, okay, well, then we've got to do this book. Like, it's just, everything's lining up. Um,
Interesting.
and then,
So what I'm interested in, like, obviously he kind of made that final decision, but for it to end up in your portfolio, things you wanted to do anyway, obviously there was something about that story that came alive to you or was fascinating to you. So what is it about that, plastic in particular that got you kind of jazzed or interested or?
I'm honestly, I love weird and unique stories.
Okay.
And for this one, it was just like, it was a very simple premise, but like we wanted to put all this other stuff in there. Like I wanted to play with mixing emotions, like, and
Hmm.
almost conflicting emotions on the same page. So,
Hmm.
we open up with what's technically a love scene in like the creepiest part of Louisiana you can possibly have one. And so, it's like mixing those two emotions to make you go, wait a minute, like have your brain kind of misfire a little bit and go, wait a minute, these two things shouldn't be together,
Yeah.
but they still work.
Yeah.
And so that's like what really intrigued me was just like this like odd, I just wanted to do this weird tale involving a serial killer that like had this fascination with plastic and was just desperately in love, true love, like,
Yeah.
unabashed, unapologetic, you know, love for something that he was willing to die for.
Yeah.
And so, that kind of like strength, the strength that gives you, I think is what appealed to me. And then to throw it on, into this weird, odd character who should technically be a villain, but he's
Yeah.
not,
He's
you
not.
know?
Well,
Yeah.
it's kind of interesting too because as far as like the test of true love, is it really like it changes him. Like it's this love that like has kind of like saved him from this other life he had, you know, brought him on the straight and narrow. So yeah, it's very interesting. It's the book is very much full of a lot of those moments of contrasting weird emotions. So yeah, was it always kind of conceived as like the kind of, I think, is it 6 issues altogether? Like
No, I think
six
it's
issue
five. I
arc,
think that one
five
was
five
five.
issues.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I really like that it's a self-contained narrative. It feels like a pulp drama you might have caught like Saturday afternoon on like, television as a kid and been like, what the hell is this thing? But um I was reading at the end, and you talk a little bit about like your process with this one, and you talk specifically about like, oh, you wanted this to be like your best work to date. So I'm really curious about like where your writing was at the time that you started this, and kind of how your process grew throughout. Like in what areas did you grow in working on this book?
I mean, plastic honestly was like a huge step, I feel, in my evolution as a writer, the way I approached I mean, like there was a lot of things that happened during the process of plastic that changed me probably forever.
Hmm.
Up to that point, like I said, I'd spent about 10 years working for DC Custom, and I'd done some stuff for 12 gauges of the ride and that kind of stuff. And up until that point, I was really concerned about trying to appeal to as many readers as possible.
Hmm.
And I'd felt like that had always hamstringed me a little bit. Like I wasn't writing what I wanted to read. I was trying to write what other people wanted to read.
Yeah.
And to be honest with you, like plastic, Daniel and I did not think anybody would read it. Like we didn't think this had a chance. Like, and people were telling us that. I mean, people were telling me that this was going to ruin my career. Like I would
Real
not write
interesting.
after this. And so Daniel and I just kind of went, let's throw everything out and let's write for us. Like, let's write a story that we would want to spend our money on, that we would
Hmm.
enjoy watching or reading. And so taking that approach with it and then seeing it resonate with other people kind of changed how I do everything now. And so
Interesting.
like, yeah, it was just like this really fun, like, discovery of going, the worst thing I can do is try to write for other people. I need to be writing for me. If it's not good enough for me, it's not good enough for anybody else.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so like it really kind of woke a different part of the way I approach story and the way I think of story is like, I don't get concerned about like, I can't write and draw like Brandon Dayton. I
Hmm.
never will be able to do that. I don't need to try to do that. Like I need, if you and I were to work together, it's like, no, Doug has to write for Doug.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, number one. Obviously, if we were working together, I'd want you to be just as excited about
Sure.
what we were working on, and that's where Daniel and I kind of have a similar sense of disturbed comedy. you know. um, but yeah, I mean, it was transformative for me, even
Interesting.
to this point. Yeah, it's like go too far, try to go too far. Because what
Hmm.
I found is like, when I work with Daniel, I'm like, there were scenes where I was like, dude, I want you to go too far here. I want you to try to have me call you and go, you went too far. And he would say the same thing to me. And that phone call never happened. We would
Hmm.
try to go too far for each other. And you'd be like, surely I'm going to get a call. Surely he's going to be like, dude, I'm not doing this. And it never happened. And I think
Yeah.
that made the story better.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I would just let people know right there that it's possible this book may go too far for you if
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's definitely that. Yep.
yeah. So yeah, you talk about how you're not really thinking about writing for an audience anymore. And I'm kind of curious about a couple things on that. I know Stephen King has talked before that he kind of has an ideal audience that he writes for, but it's not like he's trying to make it mainstream. But he has kind of people in mind, like a select group of people in mind where he's like, I want to make something that so and so would think is really cool. Is there any of that going on for you at all? I mean, you're doing it for yourself too, but do you feel like you have like a little more like a smaller niche imaginary audience you're trying to write for in
Oh
any
yeah,
way?
definitely. There's
Yeah.
definitely a couple of people that I've grown to know over the years. Daniel's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
That if I can get them to chuckle in like a kind of a sinister way, or if I can
Yeah.
get them to go, "Oh my God, I can't believe you did this," but in a positive light, like they enjoyed it. That I went too far for them. I definitely like think of them because I've realized like that's my niche market
Hmm.
for something like plastic or vinyl. It's like don't
Yeah.
try to like make this for everyone. Go straight for the jugular on the people are going to like get a kick out of it.
And you know if it works for that for yourself, for those couple of people, it's probably gonna be the right tone for all the other sickos that are interested in this stuff, right?
Yes, exactly. Yep. That's I found my people. As I say that a lot of like I found my people. Because when people come up and they're like, "Oh my God, I read Plastic, I love it," and I'm like, that tells me a lot about you. Like
Yeah.
like we're on the same wavelength. And it's
Yeah.
it's just I really do think like finding that helped me find what my real voice was. Even after writing for 15 years professionally, like I didn't find my voice until Plastic.
Hmm. You know, that is a recurring theme when I talk with artists or hear stories of artists. That's always like that moment of like finding your voice is always like kind of the best moment, you know? It's always like the exciting moment of like, oh, this is how I'm going to tell a story. This is the way that I do things. Um, but it's true that it does like it really takes time. It takes time to kind of
Mhm.
find your way to that, and yeah, you can't really like force that to happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's I will say I bumbled into it.
Yeah.
And luckily I had been and I don't want to use the word talented because I think that's overused, but like I had been lucky enough to get work just based on whatever reasons editors wanted to continue to hire me up until that point before I found my voice.
Hmm.
And bumbled into Plastic and through Plastic, kind of like taking the governor off, and being allowed to do that for the first time. But I can tell you, like, and I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. Like, once you find that, once you step into that, it's so freeing. Like, you feel like a weight's taken off your shoulder
Hmm.
when you stop writing for the world.
Yeah.
Like, when you're trying to not, I mean, because dude, like, there's no way. Like, I mean, look at the last Transformers movie that Michael Bay did. Like, I mean, it did 600 billion or some crazy number, and everybody hated it, right? Like, all you hear is
Yeah.
how bad it was. And I think Michael Bay is really good at like appealing to a mass audience of people that like that stuff, but
Hmm.
yet there's still going to be people that hate it. You and I could probably sit here and talk about movies that we love that we think are perfect, and there's going to be people that hate them.
Yeah.
And like once you realize that, you go, listen, let me write for my people. Let me write for the people that are going to like we're into the same thing. We're going to enjoy the same kind of like craziness or whatever you enjoy. It just frees you up. Like you start writing, it's so much easier.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I mean, I think when I originally talked with you about Plastic, there was even something about it as far as like the concept is so straightforward and kind of easy to understand
Hmm.
that for me, I kind of took it as like, oh, this is like a really savvy, like strategic move by Doug. That he's like, I want to make a story that people can immediately get and understand, and they're gonna you know?
No, there was no strategy behind that. That was just blind,
Okay.
bumbling luck, as far as like, and again, that was something that I evolved into and learned from that book taught me so much, which is weird that I wrote it and that it taught me more than I think, the book gained from it. Um, Having something that you can pitch in a single sentence without giving away the story
Yeah.
and seeing people, and I think you and I've talked about this before, like people either are immediately interested in it or they're immediately repelled by it.
Oh yeah.
And you say a serial killer that's in love with a blow up doll and seeing people violently react to the term blow up doll and just walk away calling you names
Oh wow.
teaches you like there's something it like makes you a little bit bulletproof to like, oh, when people do that, they haven't even read the book. They don't know if
Yeah.
this is good or not. They're reacting to a single term, and whatever hang up they have with that is not a reflection on me. That's a reflection on them.
Yeah.
And and you just kind of like you learn this like weird like I don't know like they're so offended by that term. And you don't have to pitch anything else. That's the one sentence I use to pitch that book, and people
Yeah.
either walk away mad or they buy it. There's rarely anything in between.
The funny thing is I'd be willing to bet it's the blow up doll part of it that's more offensive to people than the serial killer part, right?
Oh, hands
Yeah.
down. Yeah, people are used to serial killers now. It's not that part. Never, their eyes don't pop when they hear
Yeah.
that. When they
Yeah.
hear blow up doll, that's when their eyes explode, and they're like, oh my god, you're a horrible person. Have fun, sleeping with Lucifer, kind of stuff. And they're like, what? Okay, like I'll let you play with that, but like, it's I don't know, dude. Like I said, I bumped into that and learning
Mhm.
to like be able to pitch your book in a single sentence or your story in a single sentence, and make it just like boil it down to its essence like that.
Yeah.
And seeing people react that way has been a real learning experience for me.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm guessing there are the times too that when you pitch it and people all they have to hear just that and that's enough, right?
Yes.
They're like, yeah. There's really something to that. I've heard like all of these theories about like pitching and that like pitching you have to like tell people the people have to know the character and what the character is about, and I don't really think that's the case. Like sometimes I think pitching is just about selling the imaginative nature of the story, right? Because
Yep.
you're from your pitch, you know nothing about the main character. It's a serial killer with a
No.
blow up doll. It's like you don't know anything about the story from that, but just the fact there's something about that that tells you it's almost like a way of signaling like I'm willing to go out there, you know?
Yeah.
Because I had that same experience with Green Monk. Like I never sat down and said like, oh, he's this kid that was raised with this monastery and he has this real desire to do this. I was just like, it's about this monk and he's a Russian monk and he carries this sword that's made out of a giant blade of grass. And that's all I had to tell people. And some people were like, oh, that sounds awesome. Now's enough.
I totally agree with you. I think if you can't do that, which you just did, if you can't do that with your story, first, I think you might not understand what you're writing.
Mm-hmm.
Second, you might not have the content you think you have.
Hmm.
Um, I think, if you're like, oh, there's a guy and he's a hitman and somebody killed his dog. We know what that movie is,
Yeah.
right? We don't have to go any farther than that. And if that's your new pitch, then it's like, no, you're just writing John Wick. Like you're not going to replace John Wick. So
Yeah.
what's your hooks? What's going to make people go, oh, I want to read that? And it's something as simple as, I have this special weapon.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, I got to know what that does. Done.
Yeah. That's
Or
all.
if it's a serial killer and a blow up doll, and they're like, what is that about? I got to know more.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm like you, I've read all the same book. I'm sure we've read all the same books on pitching. And you get
Mm-hmm.
into like, oh, here's the perfect log line, and then you read half of them, and you're like, I don't even know what that's about. Like, I have no clue. I'm not interested in it.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. And not saying that the story might not be good, but when it comes to
Yeah.
just pitching at the table, like, can you get somebody in like just a few words, fewest words as possible? And if you don't understand that, you might not understand your story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it totally gets back to a good pitch is like it sparks that same thing that makes you excited in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of artists, it's like there's that image, there's that contrast that gets you excited. And if it works for you, maybe it's gonna maybe it's gonna work for someone else, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't understand from the beginning that maybe the coolest thing about your idea is it's a monk with a blade of grass as a, kind of like a weapon. You could lose that as you're writing it, right? And you could be like, oh, my focus gets away from this. And you spend a whole chapter and this special piece of grass doesn't show up. Like, the blade of grass, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. I just spent a whole chapter and I didn't use the one thing in my book that may be the thing that most people are interested in. Yeah. Including yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. In my book, it's the payoff after the whole rest of the story, but for most of the story. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. It's making me think about some other things that I'm writing too. And it's fun to kind of think about different stories that you're interested in and like, oh, what's the little hook that I've got there. Fortunately, I've also got my daughter. And so I feel like if I tell my daughter an idea and she like gets excited about it, then I'm like, okay, that's also a good sign.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It has to be, right? I mean, if you tell somebody about any idea, luckily you have your daughter there, but anybody, you can kind of gauge from their immediate reaction on like, if they're excited about it or not. You can tell, people will fake it for you if they're your friends, but you can tell, like, they're like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I really like that idea. So you want to go to McDonald's? And you're like, oh, you don't have any interest in this at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting. So yeah, I'm kind of interested in the connection between, plastic and vinyl. Obviously it feels like there's this thematic thing, but it feels like, oh, Doug's really going with the serial killer theme. He's really running with the serial killer theme. So I'm kind of curious, like, these are both these really dark stories about kind of lovable serial killers.
Right.
Honestly, it's like, one of them in vinyl, the guy's like literally a big teddy bear, but he's this very kind of likable, endearing character, and he's a serial killer. But is there kind of like a connection between those two, like some sort of thematic through line between those two?
There's a couple.
Yeah.
What was interesting is when we got done with plastic, and it was more successful than hands down than we ever thought it would be.
Yeah.
We went to Eric Stevenson at Image and we were talking to him and we were like, hey, we're kind of interested in doing plastic too. And he explained how retail works and, like that was actually a bad idea in his opinion. Like he thought like what happens a lot of times is, obviously with a miniseries, there's attrition. Yeah. He's like, so what's going to happen is Plastic 5, those are going to be like, if you release Plastic 2, retailers are going to order whatever they ordered of Plastic 5, and then you're going to see more attrition.
Yeah, it's different than a new series. New series, you're going to get a bigger bump up front.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he was like, well, what if you did something like, and I can't remember what he was like, plastic leather and whatever. And nice. He's like, you could do like a trilogy kind of thing. And that's kind of like, honestly, where the idea came for vinyl. I was like, oh yeah, I like that idea.
Yeah.
And we started, vinyl came to my head and I was like, okay, what could we do that's different with vinyl? Because, I was thinking more like pleather. And I was like, wait a minute, there's vinyl records, like let's change the shift there.
Yeah.
And then the through line there was just like this whole like, almost like a serial killer as a good guy.
Yeah.
Like do they have, what would turn somebody that's that bad into doing something for the greater good?
Yeah.
And in this one, it's just a different kind of love, in my opinion. Like, he's this FBI agent who he thinks is his best friend, or he sees as his best friend anyway. And so he's got this love, for this guy. Yeah. And somebody takes it from him. And he's like, no, I'm not going to allow this to happen. And he's like, and he goes and gathers his like Justice League of serial killers to help him out. So like, and it's in our head, it's all in the same universe. Mm-hmm. And there will be a mention of Edwin from Plastic.
I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice.
I think we did a good job of like working that in without like it feeling awkward. It's kind of like, Edwin and an older serial killer kind of have a talk, and Edwin or Walter and an older serial killer have a talk, and Edwin comes into the conversation.
Interesting.
So it's, almost kind of like we kind of played with this idea of like they kind of know each other.
Sure.
Everybody in the serial killer world kind of
it's like working in the comic book industry, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know that guy. probably more overlap there than we'd want to admit. But
Oh yeah, in a scary way.
yeah. Um, yeah, what was I gonna ask about that? Yeah, so yeah, vinyl too though definitely strikes me as it gets weirder. Like it's weirder
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, was that intentional? Were you kind of saying like, okay, well, we tried to push things last time. Maybe we need to push things even more on this one.
yeah. I mean, for me, it was you can get caught in that trying to escalate
Sure.
things. You see that in movies a lot where they do the second movie or the third movie, and they're just trying to escalate what they thought moved the first one. But Daniel and I found out we loved what we did in plastic, and we just want to kind of to keep running down that path of like we love weird stuff. Let's keep doing what we love, like let's keep writing for us, and what we love is the weird aspects of these.
Hmm.
And we started talking about like villains. We went through the typical like, oh, it could be the gang, it could be a gang, it could be, the mob, whatever. And Daniel's like, yeah, none of these are just resonating with me. Like they all
Hmm.
fall a little flat. And so then I think he saw that night, he watched the Manson documentary. He came back and he's like, what about a cult? And I'm like, that's it. Like they have
Yeah.
serial killers against a cult have to be the thing.
Yeah.
So like that's where that kind of just like blossomed into this like, how crazy can we make this?
Yeah.
And how much fun can we have to where like again, I want to be in that situation where as a fan I'm enjoying like what am I reading? Like where's this going and what kind of craziness have we bumped into? And
Yeah.
hold on a second, I got a stupid pop up. So just I mean, yeah, dude, it was just we wanted to be crazy and have fun and make each other laugh while we're doing it. Be like, I can't believe we're doing this kind of fun stuff. And that's why it just kept getting weirder.
Yeah. Nice. Um, yeah. Uh, how would I do I want to phrase it? I mean, as far as I mean, it sounds like definitely you're just like having fun doing it. Are there any kind of more technical things you're thinking about as far as writing that you're trying to do with this?
When
Um,
I, when I first start, yes. When I first start, like I apply 3 act structure, and I grab Blake Snyder's book and Robert
hmm,
McKee's book and all the standard ones that I'm sure we both have read
yeah,
more times than we'd admit, and I
yeah,
apply that to the basic story. But then when I get into the story, I'm like, okay, here's how the beats lay out, but let my gut kind of like take me where this is going to go.
yeah,
And so there's definitely 3 act structure involved in it, but at the same time, like I will sacrifice a little bit of structure for the weirdness,
yeah,
if I have to. It's like, hey, 'cause, if you read all these books, they have their formulas. If formulas worked in entertainment, everybody would do it.
yeah. No,
Do
it's
it
very true.
successfully. So it's like take that, use it to help you create a story, but then dive into what does my gut tell me to
Hmm.
do here?
Yeah, this whole issue of formulas is something I've been thinking about a lot lately because I feel like as this stuff's going on, the formulas are getting more sophisticated, and some people have their own formulas. Like Pixar has like their formula; they have their way of
Mhm.
of cooking things. And it's interesting that sometimes you're like, okay, these guys are really working this formula well, but it still feels like a formula. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? I sometimes
yeah,
feel that about like Pixar films, or I feel that about like the Marvel movies. Sometimes it's like, okay, they're hitting all the like um right points in the arc, but something about this still just like feels kind of dead to me.
yeah.
I wonder if it's that thing that you're talking about, that it's like this mix of like intentional work versus like the intuitive, the gut, following that.
Yeah, I think there's a mix of like there's logic, right?
Yeah.
And logic, like I think logic is your formula,
Yeah.
but stories are about feelings,
Mm,
and feelings are not logical,
yeah.
a lot of the time. And so, like, I think you're right. I think there's some people that have found a formula that works for them. I don't know if it's duplicatable.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't mean this to sound negative, but you have to admit that, like, in all of entertainment, 80 to 90% of the content that is created is unsuccessful.
Hmm. In
That's
what
a
way?
large portion, whether it be monetarily,
Okay.
critically, however you want to measure that.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
like,
In both measures. Yeah.
I mean, think about all the movies that are released every year.
Mm.
And what maybe you could argue maybe 4 or 5, maybe 10 on a good year are you're like, oh my God, that was great.
Mm-hmm.
And but that's 10 out of what, a
Thousands,
thousand?
if
Yeah,
not
thousands of
more.
movies. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think you can get caught up. Like everybody's trying the formula. I think everybody that's creating entertainment is trying a formula.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll have to admit that 8 out of 10 times it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the scary part from a creative, from one creative to another. Like, that's the scary part. Is you're like, yeah, I followed the formula.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. For some reason, this doesn't resonate with people. And there's that variable I think we can't quantify, whether it's, the emotional, how it resonates with people, whatever that might be, that since we can't quantify it, you can't put it in the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or one other way to say it is like, it doesn't help you get, it's this process that doesn't help you get to that, like that intuitive place. It doesn't generate, the outcome that you want it to generate. Right.
Right.
Yeah. And that's something that's really tricky to find the right balance of, because I've definitely found myself in the place a lot of times where I'm like, I have a story, I'm working on it, I'm working through all the beats, and I'm just like, this just like isn't working, And then it's like I'm taking a shower, and suddenly it's like, boom, this. And it's like, I'm not trying to work through some process here. Just random stuff comes up. Doesn't seem like I'm really making it come up. And that's the stuff that makes the story work.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of way, any sort of rubric you use for kind of like figuring out how you need to approach things? Whether it's like, sometimes I need to think this through, and sometimes it's like, oh, this has to come from another place. I need to find a way to tap into something else to make this work.
Dude, that one's always, I think, for me anyway, it's a constant struggle.
Yeah.
Because like you, I've read the books, and I've had tons of conversations with friends, and all that kind of stuff sticks in your head of like, this is what makes a good story.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I'm writing it, and I've followed I've done A to B to C to D. I've followed all the equation, and I'm like you, I'm like, this just isn't working for me. Like, this is falling flat. It isn't working for me. And I think what I've learned in that process is to walk away from it and go, you said it earlier, what made me want to write this story in the beginning?
Yeah.
Go back to that one sentence or that one thing that you were like, this is what excited me. That's what I need to focus on, whether that follows the formula or not.
Yeah.
Go back and say, what made me happy to like write the first sentence of this? What made me go, oh my God, I have to put this down on paper? And go back to that and find out what that feeling was, because sometimes a formula can like suck the life out of that.
Sure.
But I haven't found a way to like make it work all the time, because like you, like I think subconsciously, I've lately in the past year, I found like walking away is the greatest gift to a creative that we rarely use, right? We'll sit in front of that computer for 4 hours trying to make it work, when it's like, I need to go listen to my favorite song and walk around the block.
Yeah.
And let my subconscious figure this out. Because like you, it's going to be like when I'm in the shower, when I'm on that walk, when I'm driving my car down the street, and all of a sudden, bang, there it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know how you can manufacture that.
Yeah, you can't control it. It's like, we like to pretend we're like in control of this like ship, and it's like, I'm not in control of my own mind, man. It's like, right?
Yeah. But I think what's cool about that is when it's right. And if you're paying attention, when it's working, and when it's not working. And I think one of the keys is to like have a trigger in your head when you go, you know what? This isn't working for me. I need to take a step back. I need to quit trying to forge forward no matter what, and take a step back and go, hey, this isn't working for me. I need to make this better.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a key.
That's a real skill to learn too. I think the skill to like recognize like when you aren't feeling it. Because sometimes you can just be so focused on the work. I got to do the work. You aren't even noticing that like, there's like, that unease or whatever. And obviously when something is going well and there is a great idea, like that can be so helpful. And I think that's one thing I've been really interested in lately is I think there's a lot of like real wisdom in like emotions. Like you
Mm-hmm.
pay attention to that stuff can really tell you something, you know? Geez, especially in making art.
Oh
You
yeah.
got you gotta pay attention to that stuff, you know?
You know when it feels right. You know when it feels good. You know what feeling you're aiming for, and if you're gaining, hitting that note or not. Because I think sometimes we can get caught up. Like I found, and I hate to classify everybody into two groups, but I'm going to label everybody.
Okay.
And I always use Pulp Fiction as my gauge for this one. Um, you either want to know what's in the briefcase or you don't care. And so you can get caught up in for me, and when I'm writing, thinking about, oh, what about the people that have to know what's in the case?
Hmm.
Let me explain that to them. And that will suck the life out of something for me. When
Hmm.
I'm the guy, like, I don't care what's in the case. I love They Never Show Me. That's what I love. Those are the readers I'm writing for.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think you have to find out which one of those works better for you. Because something like Jason Bourne,
Hmm.
you know all the details. You know everything.
Yeah.
That's great. I can never write something like that. Me, I don't like to tell everybody everything. I'm like, I'm going to leave this wide open and I'll let your imagination figure out, the connecting dots. Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to dive into that.
Yeah. Like I like that you actually don't go very much into Edwin's past, you know?
Yeah.
There's references and there's suggestions and you can kind of figure some things out, but it's left pretty open. I'm kind of curious too. I have not really had a chance to do a lot of like collaborative work. Do you find that obviously it's helpful to work with someone like Daniel? You have an artist that you're throwing ideas back and forth with. Does that help you in that particular way to kind of get back to the right emotion to you to be able to have a collaborator to work with?
Yes. I mean, obviously, being a writer that writes comic books, I always have some sort of collaboration.
Hmm.
I will tell you, like, a good collaboration is wonderful. A bad collaboration is just as bad. Like,
Hmm.
you're gonna, you have to find the right people to collaborate with. If you're not on the same page, if you're not trying to deliver the same kind of product, or you're not interested in the same things, those go horribly, terrifyingly bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just nothing you're putting on paper is going to work. If you
Yeah.
find somebody that has the same taste and you're kind of aiming for the same goal, there's magic that happens. Like you're
Yeah.
sitting there and you're talking and you're like, okay, we want to deliver this. And if you're on the same page and you have the same kind of taste, like I said, it's just magical. Like you kind of one up each other, but not like in a competitive way.
Sure.
It's like one of my favorites was like Brian Stelfreeze and I, when we work together, we're kind of that way. And we're always trying to like one up each other, but like in a creatively fun way, right? Like we go back to the ride and there's one scene where like the way I initially wrote it, there's a car flipping on fire behind this one character.
Hmm.
And he's like, what about a church bus? And I'm like, oh man, that'd be crazy. And I go, what about like a big bus? Like, like a Greyhound style bus? And he's like, oh my God, we have to do that. And it wasn't about like who got credit for what. It was about like, how can we make this what we want it to be?
Yeah.
And so that is magical. The opposite is just like, it goes horribly wrong. Like, oh, I don't think you could shoot a tire out and a car would flip like that. And you're like, that's not the kind of story I'm writing. Like, yeah. So you have to find the right collaborator and be okay with walking away from somebody that doesn't work with you in a collaborative way.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very like envious of that. That's something I'd like to be able to find sometimes, like a collaborator that I could resonate with. And I kind of, my instinct is that the right collaborator, it's more clear when you're going in the right direction and when you're going in the wrong direction. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Like these things we're talking about, being aware of when it's not working. The right collaborator, you talk about maybe this and they're like, no. And then you're like, realize, oh yeah, that's a total no. Does that sound kind of right?
Oh yeah, totally. And they can help you, like, again, like something as simple as like what I just told you with the Brian thing of like,
Yeah.
Is it a car? Is it a bus? Is it a moped? Because all of those three things, right, could deliver a different kind of like feel for the story.
Yeah.
And so not only can they, I think what's interesting is most of the people I collaborate with, we have this instinctive trust. And sometimes you're just like, that's not the way I would have drawn that panel, but I'm going to rely on Daniel here. If he really believes in that, I got his back.
Yeah.
And it always works out. There's like there's just this trust of like, you know what, he's doing what he's seeing and he knows where I'm going. I'm going to trust him a little bit on this one.
Yeah.
And it works. And, but then there's that whole like, hey, Doug, like this scene you just wrote, like it doesn't work. And then you can dive into like, oh, if it doesn't work, what about it doesn't work? And then there's somebody there to kind of help you feel out what you thought worked, but doesn't. And you're like, oh, I should have done, you're right. This isn't in the direction of what we've previously established with Edwin. Like, let's keep going down this path. So yeah, that's the benefits of having a good collaborator.
Yeah. It's like just one of the universal truths of being a human. You can always do better stuff with other people than you can by yourself.
And it's all terrifying at the same time.
Yeah.
I think, dude, it's not really that different than dating. It's like, you go out on a date and, you're into the Marvel movies and the person you're going out on a date with hates them. And you're like, yeah, this isn't going to work out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it's like, when you meet somebody and you're like, hey, I want to go see whatever independent film you might be into. And they're like, oh my God, I can't wait to see that. And you're like, it clicks.
Yeah. You just got to be able to fail fast too. Don't waste your time too long on.
Yeah. If it's not going well, it's not going to change.
Yeah.
You're saying, on that first date, a lot of times, whether you need to go on a second date or not.
Mm-hmm.
Collaborators are no different. Yeah. It's
if
like,
there's doubts, I don't know if you ever had this, but it's like you talk to every once in a while, I'll have a chat with someone that's single and they'll be talking about like someone they're interested in. And they're like, I'm not really sure. She sent this message, said this. I don't know what that means. And I'm like, if you don't know what that means, I know exactly what that means. Yeah. There's any doubts, then yeah, probably not going to work out.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So let's see. I also wanted to ask, I think it'd be interesting to talk just a little bit about, so you're working with 12 gauge on this, but also, Image is the publisher on this. Right. So what is the role that 12 gauge and Image are playing in the whole process of making this book happen? Yeah. I don't know if that shifted between the two books too.
No, I mean, it's the 12 gauge Image kind of relationship has always been very similar. Okay. What's great about this situation for me anyway is Kevin is kind of almost like a film producer. So he handles a lot of the business end of stuff for a book, promotion, that kind of stuff. He helps fund a book, where Image, doesn't. And so what's great about that is Image is our publisher, and I love working with Image. Having the Image eye on a book definitely brings more eyes to your project than if you were doing it on your own. There's no doubt about that.
So they're still giving you input on the book and everything and supporting it. And, yeah.
I mean, they support it, but Eric just kind of lets me run wild.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
They kind of let you do what you're going to do if they approve the book. And I think that's why he makes me show him multiple issues before he approves a book. Obviously I'm a little insane, but and Image is our publisher, and they kind of like handle the printing, the distribution, that kind of thing. Obviously their side of promotion as well. Mm-hmm. And we go to Image because Image is the best indie, publisher in the States. It's hands down. With people can talk bad about them all they want, but like they're number 3. Behind Marvel and DC, it's Image.
Yeah.
And you want more eyes on your book. It just makes it more successful.
Yeah. It's definitely the first place you want to go if you want to try to get a book sold. Yeah. I was wondering, I thought it might be kind of interesting to get a little bit like philosophical with talking about serial killers for a little bit. Obviously they're lovable serial killers, but, you're talking about Daniel, how he's such a nice guy, and you were kind of surprised, like, oh, he wants to do this book. But I'm also like, geez, Doug's like the nicest guy ever. Why are these guys wanting to tell stories about like serial killers and dark stuff? And one of the interesting things or themes in my podcast, we've talked a lot about like the shadow, like these kind of parts of our psyches that we don't always like reveal, but kind of in a healthy way, they need to be expressed somehow, otherwise maybe we literally turn into serial killers. But there's also kind of this idea that the shadow has like worthwhile messages to give us. or to send us. And so I was wondering, like, is there something these characters, these kind of serial killers, like something important that's maybe part of you that they're trying to bring to the surface? Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's a little bit of the kind of like don't judge a book by its cover
Hmm.
kind of aspect to both Edwin and Walter in these two books. Of be cautious of like assuming because somebody is kind that they're weak.
Hmm.
You know, that like what I love about Edwin and Walter is that like they're, you know, Walter I think to me is a lot more like my nerd side. You know, he's my odd, awkward, you know, kind of character that's like, oh, people disregard you because like you don't do well in social situations.
Hmm.
So therefore you're not to be taken seriously. And Edwin was kind of like that really nice guy that like, you know, be careful how far you push him because like, yes, he's nice to a point, you know, like,
Yeah.
yeah, he'll take a lot of abuse. But if you abuse someone he loves, like that's going to go poorly for you. Like, you know, you're kind of like, and I think that's what people relate to with Edwin and Plastic. Like, I think everybody has something that if you heard it or you took it from them, they would hunt you to the ends of the earth and skin you alive in revenge. You know, whether that's your wife, your kids, your dog, your cat, you know, your favorite comic book, whatever it might be. I think everybody has that love, and so I think that's what they understand. And so, yeah, for me, it was just like this whole like, yeah, just be careful how you judge people. Like, don't judge all the nice people as like they won't stand up when they need to stand up.
Yeah. So you're saying watch out for Doug and Daniel.
Well, Daniel's scarier than me. I mean, like I said, Daniel's like the sweetest guy. I don't think he would ever hurt a person in the world, but he's been training with UFC fighters for like a decade.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so
wow.
like he's like this nice, sweet guy, like clean cut everything. And I think like I don't think if you pick like I think if you tried to pick a fight with Daniel, he wouldn't do anything.
Yeah.
I think if you punched one of Daniel's friends, he would rip your arms off.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and you're like, and you wouldn't know it by looking at him. Like I said, I mean, he's just like this sweet, nice, slim, you know, good looking guy. And you're like, yeah, I mean, surely he can't do any damage to me. And you're like, oh, wait a minute. So I like that aspect of the human character. Like, don't be careful. Like I said, be careful how you judge people.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. One thing I kind of noted reading both of these books is, I mean, you kind of treat like serial killers. It's like the superpower for them, right? They really are kind of superheroes the way that you're like treating them. And so it's almost less about like their crimes or their sins or whatever you want to call them. It's about what they have potential to do, right?
Yes.
Like that's what's kind of exciting about these characters, you know?
I mean, you know, and I definitely did my watching and reading about serial killers and stuff. And I think that's the fascination people have with them is because the more you read about them, you find like a lot of serial killers are these very popular, people love them, you know, you know, and there's like a switch that goes off to where they're able to turn off almost all morality and empathy and do these horrible acts. Mm-hmm. And I think people are intrigued by that. Like, how do you do that? And like you said, I mean, it's almost like a superpower. Like, how can you be this, what seems to be this wonderful human being that everybody loves, yet you're doing these horrible things? And you're right. Like, we kind of turned that on its ear a little bit and said, well, what if it was pointed in the right direction? You know, honestly, not that different than, say, what James Gunn did with Suicide Squad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know, horrible, you know, they've done these horrible things, yet you are cheering for these characters that do these horrible things because pointed in the right direction, yes, they're a weapon for good. And that's kind of like what we tapped into there as well.
It's kind of this idea of like a monster is scary until the monster is like, you know, fighting another monster. Right. It's like the whole Godzilla thing, right? Mm-hmm. It's this thing where it's like, oh my gosh, Godzilla's coming to destroy the city. And then you're like, no, wait a second. He's coming to protect the city. There's a worse monster that it's got to protect.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's exactly the same thing. You know, it's just this misunderstood, you know, kind of like a misunderstood character, you know, that's like, oh, here's come Godzilla. And every time he comes, he destroys the city. Yet he's coming because if he doesn't come, the world ends.
Yeah.
You know, kind of thing, you know, yeah, it's wonderful. I love Godzilla. Grew up on Godzilla. Like
Yeah.
that's one of my favorites.
Yeah. I really like admire when you can kind of subvert audience expectations like that as well, where you kind of notice like, okay, I'm rooting for someone that I know is like a killer. Why am I? So maybe that's an interesting, maybe something to talk about is like, how do you make that happen? How do you make someone that should be despicable? How do you make someone root for that character? It's because this is actually a specific problem I'm working on with one of the stories that I'm working through. So I've been thinking about like, how do you create a character that should be despicable and make people want to root for them?
Dude, I mean, I think it's about heart.
Hmm.
Like I think, there's Deadpool. I'd throw John Wick in this because we knew John Wick was a monster of a human being beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can give the story heart, like they're doing something for the right reasons, even though they're a horrible person, I think that helps people feel like they're redeemable.
Hmm.
And not only, the character, but themselves as well. Like we've all made mistakes.
Hmm.
And you're like, oh, like I would like to think that I would do the right thing in the right situation. And so, yeah, I think, making them lovable, if you can, but, I don't know if Deadpool's lovable, but he's funny, like I would not want to be on a superhero team with Deadpool because I'm pretty sure he's going to get me killed.
Yeah.
But he would avenge me, in his own way. So,
Yeah.
like, I think it's just like trying to put this, like, having fun with playing with where their heart is and what their motivations are. And so, I'd even go back to like Sin City, the original Sin City with Marv. Like you knew Marv was just like this like underground behemoth of a man that killed people.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to finding somebody, he was in, finding this love of his and then saving this girl. Like you're like, oh, wait a minute, he's using his horrible side for the right reasons.
Yeah. It's almost like if the cause is noble enough, you're going to forgive a lot of what else is going on.
Yeah, I mean, because dude, I mean, I hate to like boil it down to this, but isn't that how, if you look at military and wars, isn't that how all that works? I mean, we've done despicable things. We've bombed entire cities.
Yeah.
But we did it for what we believe were the right reasons. So we kind of go, I mean, those guys that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, those were heroes. I mean, they killed millions, but and yeah, it's just how you look at it, and it's like, yes, you knew these guys, after reading the documentaries and stuff, you realize these guys like had to live with this and they knew it was going to be horrible, but they did it anyway, because they knew it was for the right reasons. It was going to save as many lives as it took.
Yeah.
And so, but that's, I think the real world works that way. It's like, hey, there's in war, you have to do horrible things. You have to kill people, and how far are you willing to go?
So in a lot of ways, it's something that we're all pretty familiar with. We do all the time. As far something to be careful with too, right? Because that can definitely be used to like justify all sorts of ugly things, But
that's the flip side of it, is that we do that in the real world constantly, right? I mean, it's we depending on what side of that coin you're on in that war, depends on who's justifying what for what reason.
Justifying what? Yeah. Well, I think it's also interesting that you also have like the twins.
Yeah.
And the twins, they aren't quite as like lovable, but they're still interesting. You still are kind of like, they're compelling. And I don't know if it's their enthusiasm. They're the kind of like fan. I mean, geez, to talk about like relating things to comic books again,
Yeah. I mean, it was just with those, it's taking, like you said, I mean, what's interesting about vinyls, we have a couple of serial killers in there and we're trying to like different methods of getting you to like them or love them.
Yeah.
The twins was just like this, almost like, and we kind of mentioned it a little bit in the book, like they're almost like your irritating little siblings.
Mm-hmm.
Like they get on your nerves, but you love them for it. Like they just do stuff that you wouldn't normally do, and their enthusiasm and their like, can-do attitude kind of like makes you like them, even though they're irritating to you. So we kind of wanted to go with that kind of like they're irritable or they're irritating, but at the same time you love them for it.
Yeah.
And then there was kind of like Guy, who's like this big behemoth of a man,
mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like we kind of went the opposite of like he's just always calm, cool, and collected. He's always in control, and I think people resonate with that. They're like, but he's helping out his friend, he's there to help out Walter because he considers him a friend. And so like, again, motivations, but then trying to find like that character that people can relate to. They go, oh yeah, I like that guy.
That's kind of interesting. I guess the other thing that makes it work is if you can find an enemy that you hate even more than like the serial killers, So yeah, the fact that the cult one resonated so quickly, I mean, that definitely tells you something about how scary.
There's another example of my don't judge a book by its cover, because we purposely wanted to make Madeline, the main villain.
Oh yeah.
She's based on Charlize Theron. We're like, what would be the most beautiful woman we could think of? And let's make her our villain. Like, she's more of a monster than they are.
Yeah.
But she's gorgeous on the outside. So people would immediately like go, oh, well, she's beautiful, because we know how society works. Beautiful people can walk into a club without getting carded.
Yeah.
So like it's just this interesting, like, we want to flip that and go like, yeah, she's gorgeous on the inside, but far more of a monster on the inside than any of our serial killers.
Yeah, there's actually a line from Walter that I think is a really nice line. And I think it's when he's with, is her name Vic? That's like the other FBI agent. And he just kind of makes offhand. He's just like something about like, I know evil and I can, this is bad.
Yeah, it's like, I know a monster when I see one.
I know a monster when I see one. Yeah. Right. Gives you a real sense of like, kind of like anticipation of what's coming. So, anyway, I mean, to be quite honest, like these type of books aren't usually my fare. So
like, you're not going to offend me, I promise.
Yeah. But I was pretty surprised by, I mean, I was like, oh man, kudos to Doug that it's like, he's making this work. I was like, I don't know about this, but, I kind of compare it a little bit to how I felt about, like, did you ever see like Let the Right One In?
Oh yeah.
Like Let the Right One In, where how you're feeling kind of like different. It's almost like it's telling two different stories at the same time. Mm-hmm. Like you have the perspective of the kid's story. And then there's this other insidious thing going on. It reminded me of that. And I just thought I was pretty impressed by that. So
thanks. Yeah.
You're doing some cool stuff, man.
Like we talked about earlier, I think that's what Plastic taught me, is like, what I walked away from that is like, listen, you can write stuff that's not for everybody.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because I like stuff that, same feeling, you're like, wait a minute, like, I'm not normally into like, say something like Dale and Tucker versus Evil, but I absolutely adore that movie. And I was like, it's just silly fun. And like, they're taking a different perspective from it, and it's okay. Like, it's, don't be, I don't take offense to somebody that goes, oh, that's not my style of book. It's like, yeah, of course, for most people it's not. And that's fine. Like, I'm not offended by that. It's like, it's okay. I think that's something, that is giving me a different kind of confidence in writing this kind of stuff. And like you said, this one's weirder. And I think that's where that confidence comes from, of like, from Plastic, of going, listen, it's okay to write something that some people don't like. It's okay. Just walk away, it's okay. Like, Seven Psychopaths is one of my favorite movies, or Logan Lucky. And both of those movies are so different. And that's the kind of stuff I enjoy. And it's like, okay, let's lean into what I enjoy.
Yeah. I got to check those out now. Yeah.
Yeah. They're two totally different movies, by the way. They're totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have my dark side, and there's stuff that I find like appealing in that. But yeah, I can also just tell it's fun to see those two books. Like, I can see like, I don't know if I can really point to any specifics, but I feel like I see like a growth in the writing just between like Plastic to Vinyl. Like Vinyl, there's something about it that just, it feels like, I mean, I thought Plastic's great. So I'm not like crapping on, it's like a subtle difference, but I'm like, there's something about Vinyl that's just like even tighter, so.
I mean, you hope, right? That's the whole goal, is to continue to evolve, It's like, and honestly, I think with both books, what was fun for me anyway is I felt like I got better as a writer with almost every issue.
Awesome.
And so I felt like, especially with Vinyl, for some reason, like, I feel like 6 is so much better than 1, in the way I approached it. And I felt like there was a ramp up. So I'm hoping that pays off for the reader as well. But like, I felt like the finale for Vinyl might be the best finale I've ever written.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's what you want to feel, right? I mean, you're hoping
Sure.
like, when you get there that like, hey, this is my best work to date. And that's what I'm always aiming for is like, I really push myself to try to like, let's get better, if daily, if I can, but definitely with
Yeah.
each issue.
Dude, that's pretty cool. If you can get to a point where you have a formula, some sort of process that doesn't just like produce good stuff, but it's like, it's some sort of process you're doing that is causing like constant improvement.
Hmm.
That's a pretty good process to hold on to. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
yeah.
that collaborators help. Daniel helps with that a lot because we constantly push each other to do the best work we've done to date.
Yeah.
And it's that whole like somebody I can trust, and I go, hey, read this scene, tell me what you think. I want nothing but unfiltered commentary.
Yeah.
Because I know I can't. I know he's looking out for me. I know where his heart's at,
Yeah.
and so like help me become better, help me write better. And so yeah, I mean, it all works into this like constant. I don't know what the need is, but like I feel like I'm still light years away from where I want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Which is I think there's good and bad in that, obviously, but like that's that constant striving to be better. I
Mm-hmm.
love. It's
Yeah.
almost like you're practicing every day. It's like how can I get better?
But you're still enjoying the process, right?
Oh
Like
yeah, I love
getting,
it.
yeah.
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 I mean,
I
with
think that's the
creatives,
key.
they're always they're like up and down. The demons are always talking. And those kind of things. But yeah, it's I love it. I love writing.
Yeah. Well, dude, Doug, this has been like super inspiring.
Oh,
It's awesome
thanks.
how I have these conversations and I feel like they're always like what I need to hear like at the moment. So it definitely makes me pumped to like get out and start doing some writing and man, maybe I need to like find like the right collaborators. That's
Yeah.
probably
I mean, you and I did we meet with the drink and draw, or did we
you mean
meet outside of that?
like draw night and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we met through draw night. Yeah. That's
Okay.
originally. Yeah.
I mean, because finding that kind of I'm in a write club where we kind of
Yeah.
do the same thing on Friday nights, and yeah, finding the right people is tough because I know a couple of times over the years that we would go to drink and draw, there was always a different. It seemed like there was people coming and going.
Yeah,
And
always
sometimes
change.
you just bump into those people and you're like, man, I don't need to be in this room because they're actually hurting me, not helping me.
Yeah.
But yeah, finding the right collaborators and finding a group of people you can trust to throw stuff at and tell you whether it's, because sometimes you're like, hey, I got this stupid idea. Is it stupid? And they're like, yes. You're like, okay, I just wanted to make sure before I continue,
Yeah.
you know? So
Dude,
yeah,
that
I think,
trust. That's
yeah.
like invaluable, right? Finding people you
Oh
can
yeah.
trust to yeah.
Or people that, I know I have this stupid idea, but can you help me make it good?
Mhm.
Finding those people are like, okay, yeah, I see where you're going. I don't think you've gone far enough. Or I think, if you did this turn here, it would make it better. Just finding those people is key. Finding those
Yeah.
people you can trust to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, man, that's probably secret to life right there,
Oh yeah.
Find the right
Yeah.
people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Surround yourself. I mean, you're right. That's like a life lesson. It's like surround yourself with the right people
Yeah.
that have your interest in mind, you know,
Yeah.
and you'll be successful that way.
Cool. Yeah. Well, awesome, Doug. Yeah, thanks again for hanging out with me. This has been like a great conversation. Yeah, and we definitely need to we gotta hang out in person sometime. Maybe while you're still
Oh
on
yeah.
holiday. We should
Yeah.
we should hang out and I don't know.
Yeah.
Try not
Most
to
definitely. We need
try
to
not
get
to
together
transmit
more.
COVID to each other
Yeah,
or whatever.
exactly. It's like, yeah, try to find the right way to do that now is
Yeah.
the more difficult part.
Yeah. All right, cool, man. Thanks again.
Oh, my pleasure, dude.
You've been listening to How to Be an Artist. To support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/H2BNA.